Mainline video games are created with great care, as developers attempt to ensure each player leaves the experience satisfied. This means there's lots of playtesting as they seek to guide players down very specific paths where they are intended to feel specific ways at specific points. Every little detail is implemented for a reason, to create that near-perfect playthrough that appeals to as many people as possible. Due to this highly curated nature, changing just one detail is often enough to significantly alter how a game looks and feels. And in the case of Final Fantasy games, although fans have much love for the original versions of most of them, sometimes they start to wonder about what the game would feel and act like if certain elements were changed. This is what has led a robust community of modders to create a number of different alterations to Final Fantasy games. Sometimes this has been driven by a desire to alter the very core of the game, but there are also just instances where modders want to right the wrongs of a dismal port, and that's very much the case with Final Fantasy VIII on PC. Square did attempt to fix some of these aspects with the alternate Final Fantasy VIII remaster, but even that ended up having a significant amount of mods made. It means that across the two games, there are plenty of ways to keep things interesting, with many mods out there that fundamentally change the way the game looks, sounds, and plays. It's those mods that we're going to be covering today, and to kick things off, we're going to be talking about Succession. The story of Final Fantasy VIII was something of a roller coaster, but while some were enthralled, others felt there were elements of the story that they weren't all that fond of. Some of this has manifested in the creation of some very extravagant theories being developed, while others sought to dive straight into creating mods that flat out change the story. And in that regard, one of the most well-known has to be Succession. The Succession mod sought to alter the plot of Final Fantasy VIII in such a way that plot devices that some players may not have enjoyed, such as amnesia, were removed altogether. What's most interesting about the Succession mod, however, was not that it was a complete overhaul of the story, but instead that it was designed to enhance the core narrative that was already there. That means that, alongside removing any semblance of amnesia, Succession also removed time compression. Now, given how integral time compression was, this may sound like an absolutely dire decision, but Percival Dulac painstakingly went through the story to make sure that characters maintained their original personalities, motivations, and beliefs despite the scenario rewrite. Via these modifications, specific characters ended up becoming more pronounced, with their motivations made clearer. It became a case of enhancing rather than discarding the work that Square had initially done to craft a cast of memorable characters. Percival Dulac also went so far as to make sure that the core themes of Final Fantasy VIII were emphasized further, and this allowed the mod, which overhauls the story, to create a narrative that feels like and is true to the original vision of the game. Unlike Succession, martial law did not change any elements of the story. Instead, it aimed to rebalance the game, while also making gameplay even more customizable. To some, Final Fantasy VIII is a very unbalanced game. Due to the way that Guardian Forces and Junctions were implemented, new players without a deeper understanding of the game's core mechanics sometimes found themselves underpowered through most of the playthrough. Conversely, experienced players who knew and understood the intricacies of those systems could become extremely overpowered pretty early on in their playthroughs. The martial law mod aimed to account for both of those scenarios. For example, whereas Guardian Forces in the original game could vary quite a bit in terms of how effective they were and their stat scaling, the martial law mod standardized the way Guardian Forces worked so that there would be less variance between them. This was achieved by having each Guardian Force linked to a core stat in a uniform way, and this meant that there were two Guardian Forces that represented each core stat. The mod also made new Guardian Forces easier to jump into using by having each start out with a junction aligned to their core stat. The junction bonuses granted by magic were also revamped, preventing experienced players from becoming overpowered too easily. The aim was to make the game more enjoyable and replayable for even the most experienced of players. Further to this, martial law changed the role of certain Guardian Forces in battle. It meant Siren, Diablos, Brothers, and Tombury became aligned with extremely tanky builds owing to their low damage output and slow charge times. This meant they could shield party members effectively in combat rather than having a direct impact on the battle itself through damage dealing. For everything that martial law did, one thing it didn't alter though was enemies, and that's where the Crystal mod comes in. The Crystal mod altered gameplay by addressing both playable characters and enemies. Whereas martial law focused almost entirely on rebalancing the junction system, the Crystal mod went in the opposite direction by de-emphasizing junctioning in favour of stat gains from traditional leveling. This was something that many players had wanted in the original game, because although the junction system does have its supporters, there were many out there in the wider fanbase who preferred to just focus on getting stronger through more traditional means. Despite this rebalancing, the Crystal mod did make the game somewhat more difficult, and this was something experienced players had sought for some time. Given how easy it is to take advantage of the junction system, experienced players often have to intentionally handicap themselves to make the game feel more challenging. The Crystal mod addressed this while simultaneously making the combat experience much smoother by altering enemy resistances, weaknesses, and stats. For example, the Grand Mantis experienced a decrease in HP and its weakness to thunder increased to 200%, while the Red Giant became less resistant to zombie and poison. Interestingly, the changes the Crystal mod made to enemies were not just limited to rebalancing their stats and item drop rates. The mod also changed some enemy encounter rates and encounter locations. Notably, the encounter rate of adamantoises was significantly increased in various areas of the game. The final cool thing this mod did was add a small number of new side quests, serving to provide log-time players with fresh content. Although overhauling combat mechanics in itself could make the game feel fresh again, it's just not as impactful as adding new content altogether. And such was the impressive nature of the Crystal mod that it was incorporated into another popular mod, ZyMod. Usually, mods just target a few components while making improvements, but some go a step further. ZyMod aimed to create a comprehensive overhaul of Final Fantasy VIII by altering and bringing together changes from a variety of different mods. It updated environmental textures, UI, enemy AI in battle, and even the story changes from the Succession mod. Beyond this, however, ZyMod also made a handful of other changes, and these changes served to make the overall gameplay experience quite difficult when compared to the vanilla version of the game. One of the key ways that ZyMod did this was by making Guardian forces much weaker during the early game, while still maintaining a modified version of enemy level scaling. The mod also made the magic and status effect weakness system more consistent to help with streamlining gameplay. For example, enemies that were weak to fire, like plants, were also made weak to the blind status effect. This could take a lot of guesswork out of the game, allowing players to go through combat scenarios in a more intuitive and seamless way. On the note of magic, the mod also made it harder to draw, intentionally setting up the game so that players acquired most of their magic spells through refining items instead. One of the most fun things the mod did, however, was to create a cosmetic-only job change system. When characters changed their weapons, they also changed their outfits and job title, and this helped to make the whole gameplay experience feel a lot more alive and immersive. Now, some players felt the original PC version of Final Fantasy VIII had much lower quality music than they'd hoped for, and this was particularly hard to stomach given the importance of Nobuo Uematsu's score to the overall experience of the game. This is where the converted music mod comes in. It worked by directly converting music from the PlayStation 1 version of the game using the direct music format, and then providing them for upload as individual music files. They were then mapped to replace the music in the PC version of the game, reverting it to how it should have sounded in the first place. It's still baffling that such an oversight existed, but it was at least fixed when they launched the Final Fantasy VIII remaster. On that note, with Final Fantasy VIII now being available in both remastered and original form on PC, players are able to choose which version of the game they would prefer to play, and they're still both on sale. Some do prefer the remaster due to its quality of life adjustments, but there are those out there who still prefer the original version, favouring the lower quality graphical style. However, there are those who also want some kind of happy medium, and that's where the Angelwing mod comes in. This mod only works on the original Steam version of the game, and served to improve environmental graphics in the game so that they no longer appear blurry or fuzzy. This meant the environments really popped out with a smooth and clean look, and Squall's avatar was also updated, but in a way that felt more natural compared to the remaster. Due to these aspects, even though Angelwing didn't directly influence the gameplay or the story, it did still change the way the game felt overall. Its graphics-based nature also allowed it to be used in conjunction with other mods that made more substantial changes to the game's story or mechanics without being incompatible. This made it a worthwhile mod for many players to check out in the past, but also even since the remaster has become available. That then brings us on to another mod that changes the presentation in a way that's quite unlike the two previous examples, and that mod is EchoS 8. Final Fantasy VIII came out before voice acting became the norm in Final Fantasy games. For those who played at launch, this was par for the course, but for those who got into Final Fantasy much later and became familiar with fully voiced games, they therefore had certain expectations when going back into the back catalogue, especially since Square Enix did add voice acting to some older games such as Final Fantasy IV. The chances of Square Enix performing such an undertaking for Final Fantasy VIII is pretty unlikely, especially with rumours of the Final Fantasy IX remake in constant circulation. As such, a dedicated group of fans have taken it upon themselves. Under the watchful supervision of Sunamods, a team of voice actors and other enthusiasts worked together to create the EchoS 8 mod, which aims to provide full voice acting for almost the entire game. This team was passionate about bringing the original game to life, just as they have done with other games from the PlayStation generation, and that passion shows through in the work they have done on the project. At this time, the mod isn't fully complete because the game is, well, quite long, but a demo is available, so you can get a real taste of what it will look like once it's finished. As you can imagine, this mod is not compatible with some of the other mods on this list, such as Succession, given that it relies so much on the story, characters, and the dialogue to remain intact, but that doesn't make it any less impressive or any less noteworthy. And with that, they were 7 Final Fantasy VIII mods that fundamentally changed the way the game looks, sounds, or plays. How many of them have you used, and which ones would you recommend? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and of course, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Alright everyone, with that, this is Darryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, DeLivestream, Juan Jaramillo, Justin Dent, and Sukun TDK, or super special Onion Knight supporters. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.